I think American middle-class culture is ruining America.
America middle class culture is ruining middle America and all Americas.
No, it's ruining everything. It's ruining literally everything. Yeah. I mean, we export ourselves, so maybe it's ruining the whole world. Let's just extend it. Let's get out there on a limb, right? When I say that, though, really, what do I mean? I kind of mean American modernism, right? The type of America that's existed post-World War II, where we instill in people a certain set of values, right? We've adjusted our culture. You tell your youth that to be a successful and respected member of society, you leave home at 17 or 18, go somewhere where you don't know anybody, go to college, right? And then if you're successful, you can start up a little nuclear family out in a nameless suburb or a town that has the same amenities that every town has, and live a successful kind of Weberian life, right? A little Protestant ethic in the spirit of capitalism in there, right? This is a very particular cultural brand. And as we're no longer in the heady glory days economically of what America was able to achieve after the world was destroyed, and we were the only people that had like working machines anymore, okay? As some of those pockets of fat have dissolved in the United States, we've been left in this situation where you get extreme social isolation. You get kids that can't get into the Ivy League, even though they feel like they're entitled to it. And then they go spend all their time online, become incels, buy AR-15 and shoot up a school, right? And I think that it's because we've really moved away from the idea of community in terms of being embedded in a place. There are other European countries with economic issues. Look at Italy, look at Greece, right? But they don't have the same end result because those people are still embedded in a community of people who care about them, who interact with them. And you don't have this extreme social isolation. It's all cultural process, in my opinion. It's a similar thing with, I think that leads a lot of people to these extremely escapist drug addictions, right? And, to Josh's point, I'm not talking about Burning Man, right? I'm talking about the kind of drug issues I see in Worcester, Massachusetts, right? So, yeah, I think that this extreme adherence to that particular brand of the American dream has ruined our ability to have a functional, things have just become quite dysfunctional in the country because of it.
So I'm trying to, again, refine the heresy, what it is. So you said it was American dream, and then you said it was maybe more modern. Because
modernism, yeah.
I'm thinking about the hundreds of millions of people in China who have left their communities, moved into the cities. And so is this what you're talking about, or is it something different than this? And the same thing is happening in India right now, where the same kind of migration is happening of people leaving these little villages where they have a certain identity. They know who they are. They're moving into big cities. They're going to college and beyond. They're mixing up. They're isolated. Is that where we're talking about this as a general phenomena, or you're saying that there's something else different than this?
Yeah, I think I do mean it a little bit more pointed than gradual urbanization due to change economically, globally. Yeah, I think there is a particular brand of the American version of this that, and honestly, the people who are most harmed by it, I think, are young men, young white men in America, right? They're feeling this sea change under their feet, right? There are more women going to college than men for a decade now, right? Why? In America. A lot of it is because men are just not achieving, dumb metrics that are kind of meaningless, like SAT scores and GPAs at the same rate as women in the United States. I think that it's all American culture bounded, where if you're failing to meet this high kind of, this Billy Crystal standard, from movies in the 80s and 90s of being able to strike out on your own with just a baseball bat and an army duffel bag full of stuff, walking into New York City to start your life, that you have failed. And I think people are being told that they're literal failures because they're not able to achieve this very time-constrained version of American success. And that a lot of the people who are doing some of the worst things in the United States right now are people who have gone through that experience of failure. And it's not necessary. I don't know that there's any analog to that type of failure in modern China or India. And I'm pretty sure there isn't a version of that in Italy or Greece. You live with your parents, you go to college, and then you move down the street when you get married, right?
Can I ask, Maggie, how much of this is the stuff part, like the part that you might call consumer culture, that we measure ourselves by how much stuff we have and how good that stuff is and the brands that go with it. And then if you want that, you need cash. And to get that cash, you move to the city because that's where the job is that pays more cash. And then you just meet more people who want the same stuff. How much of it is the stuff part of it? And how much of it is the dream of making it big? The fantasy of becoming the next Elon, and how much of it is the leaving where you grew up to go to a new place? Because all those seem to be part of what you're describing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the stuff is a major part of it, but I would extend stuff beyond consumer goods, right? And keeping up with the Joneses type stuff to meaningless achievements. Right? What's the real difference from getting a degree from the University of Georgia versus Emory in terms of your life trajectory? Not that huge. But if you don't get into Emory, right, and you have to go to Georgia Southern, suddenly that's almost like a narcissistic injury, right? Where you have this hit to your ego you can never recover from. Right? And it's just constant knocking down of ego that injures people in this way emotionally. What I'm arguing is that those standards are fucking stupid to begin with. They're not based in anything other than the imagination of what we could achieve on the GI Bill in 1950, at a time where we had far fewer people in the country. We had a far different economic outlook. And, I really don't think it's necessarily about leaving home, which, for me it is, right? Personally, I'm coming from this, again, from an outsider point of view. I didn't grow up in this type of culture, but I'm surrounded by it all the time now, right? So it's all bound up with it. But I think it's more this absolute, like you said about the Constitution, the written Constitution, this fiction we've created, this fantasy of what you need to just have a basic respectable life in upper middle class America, right? It doesn't matter how much money you make, even. If you're an underwater welder, are you getting the same respect as someone who went to Cornell? In upper middle class Boston? I don't know that you are, even if you're making double the money.
So quick question for you, Maggie.
Yeah.
And I'll just add a little backdrop. So Johann Hari is an author, if I'm getting his name pronounced correctly. He's written books about addiction and also depression, chasing the scream, lost connections. And he returns in a very compelling way over and over again to social isolation. And I suppose what I'm wondering is, as I look at cultures that I understand somewhat, like Japan, for instance, the schooling there and cram schools and test scores are even more determinant in a way of your future than, say, the SATs are in the US. However, and there are social isolation issues in Japan, but you have multi-generational households. And you look at a place like Costa Rica, multi-generational households. And I'm wondering if that is a crux component of all of this, which it seems to be, is there anything to be done in the US? Are there changes that you think we could make culturally that would remedy some of the symptoms that you're describing?
Yeah, I mean, maybe celebrate people whose lives are happy. Mm-hmm. I mean, as that's the form of success that we should be like lionizing above meeting what is frankly, like you said, right? You just said, oh, there's multi-generational households in Japan and there's this really toxic testing culture, right? You know, if you think about it in, you know, not to get too theoretical here, in an organismic way, right, where these different facets of culture work like different organs in a system as a whole, right, like a body that forms a culture, very like Durkheimian way of thinking about things. You know, maybe you can pick pieces in and out there, like you're explaining these other cultures that you have experience with. Somehow in America, we've picked a set of organs that lead to a particularly toxic end, right? Toxic individualism, right? Individualism at all costs, really, right? We don't have maternity leave, right? Like, it's just like we don't have universal health care. There's stuff that just makes economic, even neoliberal sense that we don't do because of like toxic individualism. And I do think that if we started focusing on, again, lionizing people who live happy lives, that live fulfilled lives, rather than ones who meet this American archetype, Don Draper, right? That could lead to a lot of good change, you know?
Josh, I think you had your hand up.
So I react in a couple different ways to this, Maggie. The first is, you know, if you live in New York City, you have a lot of politicians who come here to ask for your advice. Then they quickly pivot to asking for money, but it gives you a chance at least to hear from them. And I try to ask them, what's something true about your constituents that I wouldn't know? And one of them said to me once, you think all my constituents want to move to New York City. They don't. The problem is they don't have jobs where they want to live. So the first way I react to this, I totally agree. And I think we are failing, to your point, Tim, as a society, when we fail to provide employment opportunities, meaningful work, a sense of purpose in the communities where people actually want to live. And we should not assume that everyone wants to move to New York City and work for Meta and live in a loft in Soho. Although even if you work for Meta, you probably couldn't afford a loft in Soho. So that part I really react to, Maggie, and I agree with you. I probably disagree with you slightly on part of it. If you look at places like Italy and China, just picking two examples, what you cited, probably their biggest problem going forward is a demographic one, where they have some of the lowest birth rates in the world. So you pick two societies and held them up, particularly Italy, as a place where things are going well. I would say a society where people are sufficiently pessimistic about the world that they're unwilling to have children, and where they have repeatedly voted into office someone like Berlusconi, let alone the person they have now, probably aren't societies that I would hold up as exemplars of what our aspirations should be. So I'm not sure I agree with you on that point. And then the third thing I'd probably say is the maladies that you're describing, I think, are real. I think that's a confluence of things, though. I think one element absolutely is consumerism. One element certainly is social media, dislocation. They're all combined. But if I had to come back to one, I probably would go back to the point you made and where I started, which is we're failing to provide meaningful employment, a sense of purpose, the capacity to support yourself and you support your family in a community that you find meaningful. And we've assumed that's only one type of community, and that's a failing as a society.